This past March, out of boredom, I subjected myself to Hogwarts Legacy. And as someone who has seen maybe 3 or 4 Harry Potter movies in their childhood, and then never bothered to do so again, nor really thought about them, I will say that Hogwarts Legacy is at least a very pretty game. The castle itself is actually pretty interesting to explore. You can tell they focus 75% of the effort of the game into getting that core aspect of Hogwarts experience just right, and I'll applaud them for that. However, the game falls short in several key aspects. In Hogwarts Legacy, you sort yourself at the beginning of the game, because the developers knew their audience. I'm sure the idea of a somewhat long and poignant questionnaire was played with at some point, but knowing their audience, the developers of this game opted to belay all criticisms and Twitter meltdowns.
They just asked her to wait while they fix it, and that's when she came in and threw a tantrum, screaming at...
By just letting you exclusively choose what house you're in. Great! Self-induced identity crisis avoided. I don't really care about this, I just thought it was interesting that they went against one of the very first traditions ever established in J.K. Turfherder's frankly kind of mediocre library of obesiarian YA novels. I would be lying if I said this game wasn't well made in a conventional sense. Technically, the game runs quite well on my system, but what really matters to me is gameplay. And frankly, the gameplay loop of Hogwarts Legacy is not engaging enough to carry the game to the end of the story. I put about 20 hours into Bogglecart's biopsy before realizing that the journey was kind of just as bland as the destination I was heading for. So I dropped it. I dropped it cold.
The Iceman cometh!
I played for a week or so and thought the game was okay. This game is exclusively made for hardcore Harry Potter fans, or for someone who has not touched an open world game since Far Cry 3.
Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same fucking thing over and over again, expecting shit to change.
Let's get into gameplay. You have a 4-slot wheel where you can equip a spell in each slot. These spells come in 4 different flavors: control spells that stun or pause an enemy, damage spells that do big damage, and force spells, which push and pull enemies away respectively. All of these spells are cooldown based, and you activate them by holding right bumper and pressing the corresponding face button. These special spells are also combined with a basic magic missile attack that you can use by hitting right trigger. Which brings me to my first gripe about combat. Every attack in this game feels the same to use. None of them particularly feel good, because they are all just different colored blasts, especially the damage spells. The only one that is mechanically different from each other is Igneo, which is just a short-range shotgun blast to fire. Fine. Combat is simplistic, but the even bigger problem is enemy design. I am not exaggerating when I say that there are 4 enemy types, maybe 5 in this game. There is the enemy wizard, goblin or human variety, spider, wolf or dog, and armored knight guy with mace or sword. There is nothing else to be seen in a world full of mystical creatures. How do we never fight or encounter a Dementor or something more threatening? The armored knights feel especially out of place, and unfortunately, the enemies are not fun to fight. They are all one-trick ponies, especially the human enemies, which don't operate under the same rules as the player. These enemies can put up colored shields, red, purple, or yellow, to correspond to the damage, control, and force spells. Once again, the game devs have not learned the lesson taught to Ninja Theory in 2011, that color-coded enemies are a huge crock of shit, and being forced to match the color of the spell with the bubble that the enemy arbitrarily blows on themselves makes combat feel frustrating. The bubbles on the enemies force you to use certain spells on targets that are constantly moving around and regenerating those shields, making for a frustrating game of spamming dodge roll until the correct color ability comes off cooldown. It simultaneously makes fights drag while simplifying your options. Matching the color of the bubble takes almost no skill, aside from not being colorblind. It is also the game very upfront telling you that there is one type of tactic that will work on these enemies. Hogwarts Legacy could have created a vast roster of enemies with different weaknesses that were not blatantly signposted, like the big glowing colored bubbles, especially when these fights take up 75% of the fights that you will encounter in the game. This could have led to interesting experimentation. But instead, the developers chose to cater to the lowest common denominator for people who are not traditional gamers, ergo a singular path through the enemy and most encounters. The odd thing is that they do kind of have non-signposted enemies in the game. There are Inferis, which are zombie creatures weak to fire. You can find that out just by playing the game. No tutorial message needed. The Dugbog will flip on their belly if you hit them with a force spell, making them weak to normal fire for a few seconds. These are neat, but when a large majority of your game's enemy roster are 18, yes, 18, I counted them, different variations of goblin or human evil enemy wizard who throws magic at you and puts up a colored shield, the fights never seem any different from the front half to the back half of the game. By the 10-hour mark, you will basically have seen every spell in the game as well as every enemy. The combat loop never evolves past the first fight you have with a dark wizard. The combat in this game reminded me a lot of the Arkham games, and not in a good way. It has the same style of loose auto-targeting, stick-flicking kind of action, right down to the counter being on the top face button of your respective controller. One of the things that Batman got right, which Hogwarts does not, is the flow of combat. I wouldn't call the rock-steady melee combat formula exactly deep or memorable, but I still feel like the game is trying to nudge me into staying active instead of slowing me down arbitrarily. There are no mechanics that actually make you wait on cooldowns in Batman to get the upper hand. You can shift from defense to offense dynamically, while in Troghart's Dynasty, way too much of the combat in this game is spent dumping your abilities on forsods who get too close, and then dodge rolling around the arena like a maniac until your spells come off cooldown, so you can burst more shields. This may sound like a nitpick, but I can't think of many action games, except for DMC Devil May Cry, where the game forces you to wait around for so long. It is effectively your turn to attack. Let's take Sifu for example, a game that has absolutely excellent combat. Some of the best I've played in any game. There is never a moment where the game makes you sit and wait for things. In fact, you are oftentimes punished for doing that. You are more or less always in control and can be gaining the upper hand through creative and masterful play. Granted, I myself am not an expert at Sifu, but I have absolutely played enough video games and enough action games to realize where a skill ceiling might land. Sifu has a higher skill floor than Hogwarts does a ceiling. Unfortunately, the potential for creative play in Snogtart's pregnancy is severely limited by just how much the game insists on you waiting around for your chance to attack. The human enemies, while annoying to fight, are sadly the most interesting enemy. Every other enemy type is a nothing burger melee fight with a beast, spiders, wolves and dogs, and dugbogs. Along with that, the human enemies of this game operate under different rules than the player. Those shields that they get to put up seem really strong. If the player character could pop up a shield that was resistant to all but one school of magic, the game would seem like an absolute cakewalk. The human enemies of the world know a secret magic technique completely unknown to school staff and students: Colored Orb Shield. Unfortunately, for Hogwarts, combat against humanoids, all 18 variants of them, feels a bit like Simon Says. Simon says red, Simon says yellow, Simon says purple spell. The game gives you a toolbox of mechanics that must be used how they want based on what color the shield is. In my opinion, if Hogwarts wanted to get away with this melee combat, the shield system needed to be removed, thereby enabling you to use whatever move you see fit for the situation, as opposed to whatever move they see fit needs to be thrown at the colored shield. I would have much preferred to see humans more varied. They are all poachers, hunters, and general crooks.
Your poaching days are over.
And all seem to share the same movesets. None of them specialize in any school of magic. I was expecting something more in line with differential factions of bandits or evil wizards who have different themes or use only fire magic, for example. Instead, every enemy throws out the same colored blast from the beginning of the game to the end. And while some people love Hogwarts so much that this will never bother them, the repetitive combat is what made me want to drop the game the fastest. My other major gripe with the game, just in general, how the open world adds literally nothing to the Hogwarts experience. The open world does not feel like anything in the Wizarding world. It is about the most bog-standard European-looking forest blandness I have ever seen. Once outside of Hogwarts or Hogsmeade, the game stops feeling like anything Harry Potter related. This has got to be one of the least rewarding games to explore of all time. I mean, there's literally nothing to do in the open world, aside from, like, brain-dead easy puzzles. Or when the game demands you go meet a character on a faraway part of the map for a story mission. The world building in and around Hogwarts and Hogsmeade is fantastic.
I saw what you did! Ha! I have no tolerance for thieves! Hand them back!
Hand what back, sir?
These are two of the standout areas in the game, and as a result, there is a huge open world around the castle and Hogsmeade that is just there to fly over, essentially. I personally could not care less about the open world activities in this game. It's all standard copy-paste icons, dens of monsters and villains, go get this item, fetch quests, and etc. Hogwarts Legacy is a well-made product being the operative word here. You can squee out for a few hours being impressed by all of the seemingly moving parts before the honeymoon phase ends. I don't see a lot of people finishing this game, as the story is largely uninteresting. The combat system has one too many frustrating decisions, from its lack of depth to its forced cadence it requires you to play out. This combat is further exacerbated by the game's extreme lack of enemy variety. It's the same reason why God of War 2018 was let down. Really annoying and samey enemy design, a giant hodgepodge of trite AAA design tropes all blended into a homogeneous gray slurry that the masses will consume without a second thought. This is literally the game that made me never want to play an open world action RPG game ever again. God, I wasted my fucking money on this.
This is the game that you require. Yes!